Jake Morrison stood in the massive chamber of the Galactic Council and felt very small. The room stretched high above him like a cathedral made of crystal and metal. Hundreds of alien beings sat in floating chairs that moved without sound. Their eyes, tentacles, and sensors all pointed at him. He was the only human in a place where his species was barely tolerated. The Council had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. They decided which species could travel between stars and which ones had to stay home. They controlled trade routes that connected thousands of worlds. They had armies that could destroy entire planets, and right now they were very angry with humanity. Prime Zethkalar rose from the center of the chamber. The crystalline being was 12 feet tall and glowed with inner light. When he spoke, his voice came through translators that made every word sound like judgment from a god. Ambassador Morrison, your species has violated the peaceful coexistence accords for the final time. Jake kept his face calm, even though his heart was racing. 3 years ago, humanity had been granted limited membership in the galactic community. They could trade with some worlds and learn basic alien technology, but they were forbidden from expanding beyond their home system or building military fleets. The Council called it probationary status. Humans called it a cage. Earth has been caught building warships in secret, Zethkalar continued. Your people have established hidden bases throughout your solar system. You have refused repeated orders to limit your population growth. These actions threaten galactic peace. The other Council members made sounds of agreement. The hegemony representatives clicked their claws. The Epsilon Dominion delegation hummed in harmony. The ancient archivists simply stared with their unblinking eyes. They had all been through this before with other species. They knew how it would end. Jake stepped forward. His voice carried clearly through the chamber, even though he felt like a mouse addressing lions. Honored Council members, humanity has never attacked another species. We have honored our trade agreements. We have shared our scientific discoveries freely. Building defensive fleets around our own world is not aggression. Defense? The word came from Admiral Vortani of the Epsilon Dominion. The insectoid being's mandibles clicked with what might have been laughter. Your species builds dreadnoughts and calls them defensive. You militarize asteroids and claim they are mining stations. Do you think we are fools? The truth was that humans had been preparing for this moment since their first contact with alien life. Earth's leaders had studied galactic history and learned a simple fact. The Council had never allowed a species to remain independent. They either submitted completely, or they were destroyed. 47 civilizations had faced this choice. All 47 had chosen submission rather than extinction. We offer humanity one final chance, Zethkalar announced. You have 72 standard hours to dismantle your military forces. You will allow Council peacekeepers to occupy your system. You will submit to population controls and resource quotas. You will accept full Council authority over your species. This is our generous offer of continued existence. The chamber fell silent. Jake could hear his own breathing in the stillness. Every alien eye was on him. They had seen this scene play out dozens of times before. The young species would protest, then realize the hopelessness of their situation, then accept the inevitable. It was always the same. Jake Morrison had grown up in Texas and served 20 years in the United States Navy before becoming a diplomat. He had faced down pirates in the South China Sea and negotiated with terrorists in the Mediterranean. He had never backed down from a fight in his life, and he was not about to start now. Prime Zethkalar, with all due respect, humanity must decline your generous offer. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. Translator systems sparked and buzzed as they struggled to process what they had heard. No species had ever refused the Council's ultimatum twice. The first time could be explained as foolish pride. The second time was impossible. You refuse? Zethkalar's light pulsed brighter. You understand what this means? Your species will be classified as a galactic threat. Council fleets will be dispatched to neutralize the danger you represent. Your world will burn. Jake felt sweat on his forehead, but his voice stayed steady. Then I guess we'll see who burns, Prime. The transmission from the Council chambers reached Admiral Lisa Parker aboard the UES Defiance 18 minutes later. The massive ship hung in the asteroid belt beyond Pluto, hidden among chunks of rock and ice that had never formed into planets. It was one of 50 vessels that officially did not exist. Parker had commanded ships for 30 years, from patrol boats in the Caribbean to nuclear submarines in the Arctic Ocean. When humanity reached the stars, she had been chosen to command their first real warship, The Defiance was built with human engineering and alien technology, stolen from crashed ships and captured databases. It was faster than anything the Council had and armed with weapons they had never seen. All department heads to the bridge, Parker ordered. Within minutes, her senior staff had assembled. Commander Greg Thompson, her executive officer, had served with her since their days hunting drug runners off the Florida coast. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan ran the ship's sensors and communications with the precision of a Swiss watch. And Danny Rogers, barely 25 years old, was the most brilliant tactical officer the Navy had ever produced. Ladies and gentlemen, Parker began, Ambassador Morrison has just told the Galactic Council exactly where they can stick their ultimatum. We have maybe 48 hours before they send a fleet to make an example of Earth. She gestured to the main screen, which showed the positions of human ships throughout the solar system. They were hidden in asteroid fields, behind moons, and in the cold darkness between planets. The Council believed humanity had a few dozen primitive vessels. They had no idea that Earth's shipyards had been working around the clock for 3 years. The Council has crushed 47 species, Parker continued. They think we'll be number 48. They're about to learn why humans are the only species to climb to the top of the food chain on a death world. Danny Rogers pulled up tactical displays showing Council fleet movements. Admiral, our intelligence suggests they'll send a standard subjugation force. 300 ships, 12 different species, enough firepower to glass a continent. Then we'll give them a proper welcome, Parker replied. Signal all ships. Operation Prometheus is authorized. It's time to show these aliens what happens when you threaten humanity's home. The message went out on quantum channels to every human vessel in the solar system. On Earth, President Helen Carter was being moved to the command bunker beneath Colorado Springs. In the asteroid belt, mining ships were revealing their true nature as missile platforms and fighter carriers. On Mars, the colonies were powering up defensive batteries that could reach across space to strike targets orbiting Earth. The Council was coming with overwhelming force and 3,000 years of military experience. But they had made one critical mistake. They had given humanity time to prepare, and humans had spent that time doing what they did best, figuring out how to kill things that wanted to kill them. The 72-hour countdown had begun. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth was called a death world. The Council fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system like a swarm of metal locusts. 300 ships formed a perfect battle formation as they began their approach to the third planet from the Sun. Each vessel was larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their shields glowed with power that could deflect asteroid impacts. Their weapons could crack moons. Fleet Admiral Vortani stood on the bridge of his flagship and studied the primitive world ahead. His species had conquered dozens of planets over the centuries. The Epsilon Dominion provided the Council's finest military commanders, and Vortani was the best of them all. He had never lost a battle. Long-range sensors show no significant defensive positions, reported his tactical officer. The humans have perhaps 30 vessels scattered throughout their system. All appear to be converted civilian craft. Vortani's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. As expected, this species builds toys and calls them warships. Open a channel to the human homeworld. The transmission reached Earth in seconds. President Helen Carter sat in the command bunker deep beneath Colorado Springs, surrounded by the greatest military minds her species had ever produced. General Paul Richards commanded the Global Defense Force. Admiral Angela Brooks controlled the hidden space fleet. Dr. Sam Bennett had spent 3 years reverse engineering alien technology. Carter looked at the alien face on her screen and felt no fear. She had been a fighter pilot before entering politics, and she had faced death many times in the skies over hostile territory. The creature staring at her might be from another world, but bullies were the same everywhere in the universe. I am Fleet Admiral Vortani of the Galactic Council, the alien said. Your species has chosen extinction over submission. I am here to carry out the Council's judgment. You have one final opportunity to surrender unconditionally. Carter stood up so the alien could see her clearly. Behind her, the flags of every nation on Earth hung side by side. Admiral Vortani, this is President Helen Carter of the United Earth Government. I have a message for you and the Council that sent you. She moved closer to the camera and her voice carried the steel that had made her famous. You came to our home to threaten our families. You want to enslave our children and steal our freedom. Well, Admiral, you picked the wrong species to mess with. Every human who ever lived fought to survive on a world that tried to kill them every day. We didn't claw our way to the top of the food chain just to bow down to alien bullies. She gestured to someone off-screen, and tactical displays lit up throughout the bunker. You think you know what humans are capable of. You're about to get an education. The transmission ended, leaving Vortani staring at a blank screen. Around him, his bridge crew made sounds of derision. The human leader had just declared war on the greatest military force in galactic history. It was almost amusing. Begin the approach, Vortani ordered. Standard formation. We will destroy their pathetic fleet first. Then begin orbital bombardment of their major cities. Make it visible from the surface. I want the survivors to see what happens to species that defy the Council. The alien fleet moved deeper into the solar system, their sensors focused on the small human vessels they could detect. What they could not see were the ships hiding in the asteroid belt, their hulls coated with stealth materials developed from captured alien technology. They could not detect the weapons platforms disguised as mining equipment. They had no idea that humanity had spent 3 years preparing for exactly this moment. Captain Nick Barnes commanded the UES Retribution from his position behind a massive asteroid. The ship was half the size of the smallest Council vessel, but it carried weapons that should not have existed. Dr. Bennett's team had combined human engineering with alien physics to create something entirely new. All stealth ships report ready, Barnes told his tactical officer. Kinetic torpedoes armed and targeted. The big alien ship in the center appears to be their command vessel. The Retribution was not alone. 50 ships like her waited in the darkness between worlds, their crews trained for this single moment. They were outnumbered 6-1, but they had advantages the Council could not imagine. They knew their own system better than any invader could. They had studied every piece of alien technology they could get their hands on, and they were fighting for their home. The Council fleet reached the orbit of Mars and began deploying for the final assault on Earth. Vortani felt the satisfaction of another easy victory approaching. His ships formed the classical pattern that had served the Epsilon Dominion for centuries. Heavy cruisers in the center, destroyers on the flanks, fighters screening the advance. Human vessels detected approaching from the inner system, his sensor operator reported. Count as 15 ships, all small classes. They appear to be attempting to intercept us. Vortani studied the tactical display with amusement. The humans were actually going to fight. Their tiny ships were racing toward his massive fleet like children charging armed soldiers. It would be over in minutes. All ships open fire when the humans enter weapons range, he commanded. Destroy them quickly, then proceed to the planet. What happened next would be studied in military academies throughout the galaxy for generations to come. The human ships did not approach in the expected formation. Instead, they scattered like startled birds, using the moons of Mars as cover while launching weapons from impossible angles. The first kinetic torpedo struck Vortani's flagship before his shields could react. The projectile was moving at nearly the speed of light, powered by alien technology but guided by human ingenuity. It punched through the ship's defenses like they were made of paper. Impossible, Vortani breathed as damage reports flooded his bridge. How do they have relativistic weapons? The answer came from behind him as more human ships appeared from the asteroid belt. They had been hiding among the rocks and ice, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Council fleet found itself caught between two forces. With human ships attacking from directions their formation could not defend, Captain Barnes watched his torpedo find its target and allowed himself a grim smile. Signal all ships. Phase 2 is a go. Let's show them what happens when you bring a knife to a gunfight. The battle that followed was brutal and short. Council ships designed to intimidate primitive species found themselves facing weapons that cut through their shields and armor like hot knives through butter. Human fighters swarmed their larger vessels, targeting weak points that should have been impossible to hit. Admiral Lisa Parker coordinated the assault from the UES Defiance, watching as 3 centuries of alien military doctrine crumbled under human tactics. The Council had grown soft from millennia of easy victories. They had forgotten what it meant to fight an enemy that refused to give up. Alien flagship is breaking apart, reported Danny Rogers from his tactical station. Their formation is collapsing. Admiral, I think we're actually winning. Parker nodded grimly. They had planned for this moment for 3 years, but seeing it happen was still hard to believe. The greatest military force in galactic history was being torn apart by a species they had dismissed as primitive. Vortani felt his ship dying around him as human weapons tore through his fleet. Emergency lighting cast red shadows on his bridge as his officers struggled to maintain basic systems. Through the smoke and sparks, he could see the tactical display showing the destruction of his forces. How? He whispered to himself. How is this possible? The answer was simple, but something the Council had never understood. Humans did not just build weapons. They built them to kill other humans, the most dangerous predators their world had ever produced. Every ship in the human fleet was designed to fight enemies just as smart, just as ruthless, and just as determined to survive. The Council had spent 3,000 years fighting species that had never known real war. They had no idea what they had awakened when they threatened Earth. As his flagship exploded around him, Vortani transmitted one final message to the Council. The humans are not what we thought. They are something else entirely. Something we have never seen before. The transmission cut off as the UES Retribution put another torpedo into the alien command ship. The explosion lit up the space around Mars like a small sun, and the greatest fleet the Council had ever assembled began its retreat toward the outer system. But the humans were not done with them yet. The news of the Council fleet's destruction spread across the galaxy, faster than light itself. Emergency sessions convened on every Council world as reports flooded in from the Sol system. For the first time in 3,000 years, the mighty Galactic Council had been defeated in open battle by a species they had classified as primitive. Prime Zethkalar stood before the Inner Council on Nexus Prime, his crystalline form flickering with barely controlled rage. The holographic displays around him showed the wreckage of Vortani's fleet drifting. In the space around Mars, 300 ships, reduced to debris by a handful of human vessels that should not have existed. How is this possible? Demanded Counselor Yithmor of the Hegemony. Our intelligence reported that the humans possessed only basic technology. Their ships were converted civilian craft. Clearly our intelligence was wrong, Zethkalar replied. The question now is how to respond. We cannot allow this defeat to inspire other subject species to rebellion. But across the galaxy, that inspiration was already spreading. On mining worlds and factory planets and slave colonies and prison settlements, the oppressed peoples of Council space heard the impossible news. Humanity had faced the full might of the Council and won. If one species could break free, perhaps others could follow. Captain Betty Williams commanded the UES Vengeance as it approached the Kepler 442 system. 3 months after the Battle of Mars, the human fleet had not remained idle after their victory. While the Council debated and argued, human ships had spread throughout their territory like wildfire, striking at targets the aliens thought were safe. Sensor contact ahead, reported Lieutenant Mike Turner from his station. Council heavy cruiser in orbit around the mining colony. Looks like they're loading cargo pods. Williams studied the tactical display with cold eyes. The colony below held over 50,000 Yithani workers, a peaceful species that had been enslaved by the Council for 2 centuries. The aliens mined rare crystals essential for faster-than-light travel, working in conditions that killed thousands every year. Signal the alien ship, Williams ordered. Give them one chance to surrender. The Council vessel responded with weapons fire, green energy beams lancing through space toward the human destroyer. The Vengeance's shields absorbed the impact easily, while return fire from human weapons tore through alien armor like tissue paper. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Martinez led the first wave of human Marines onto the orbital station. His troops moved through the corridors with the precision of soldiers trained in the deadliest conflicts Earth had ever known. Council security forces, armed with weapons designed to intimidate civilians, found themselves facing warriors forged in humanity's bloodiest wars. Sector 7 secured, Martinez reported over the comm. We've found the processing centers. Colonel, you need to see this. What Martinez found in the depths of the station made even his battle-hardened stomach turn. The Yithani workers were being systematically worked to death, their bodies discarded when they could no longer perform. Children as young as 6 years old labored in tunnels that would collapse if they stopped moving. The human assault team moved through the facility like an avenging angel, freeing workers and destroying the machinery that had enslaved them. When they reached the main control center, they found the station commander cowering behind his desk. The alien was a hegemony overseer, his carapace marked with the scars of authority. He had ruled this station for 40 years, growing fat on the suffering of others. Now he faced creatures from a world where such behavior earned swift and violent justice. Please, The overseer begged in broken galactic standard. I was only following orders. The council demanded quotas. I had no choice. Martinez stepped closer, his weapon trained on the alien's head. There's always a choice. You chose to be a monster. The liberation of Kepler 442 sent shockwaves throughout council space. The Yathani elder Morden wept openly as human medics treated his people's injuries, and human engineers began dismantling the slave facilities. Your species fights for others, Morden said to Martinez as they stood in the colony's central plaza. Even those you have never met, why? Martinez thought of his own children back on Earth, safe in their beds because he and others like him stood between them and the darkness. Where I come from, that's just what decent people do. Word of the human actions spread from world to world, carried by traders and refugees who had witnessed the impossible. The council had always maintained control through fear and overwhelming force. But humans seemed immune to intimidation, and their military technology was proving superior to anything the aliens possessed. Admiral Lisa Parker coordinated the expanding campaign from her flagship as the human fleet struck deeper into council territory. The space station orbiting Proxima Centauri had served as a major trade hub for over 1,000 years, coordinating the movement of goods and slaves throughout this sector of the galaxy. All ships, begin the attack, Parker ordered as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace around the star system. The station was massive, larger than any human city, protected by energy shields and defensive platforms that had never been seriously challenged. The battle lasted 18 minutes. Human weapons refined through constant warfare on Earth cut through alien defenses with surgical precision. Boarding pods launched from destroyer-class ships, carrying assault teams trained in urban combat and ship-to-ship fighting. Sergeant Rachel Torres led her squad through the station's commercial district, past shops and restaurants where alien civilians cowered in terror. Her orders were clear: secure council military assets and intelligence databases while protecting non-combatants. It was a difficult balance, but one that separated humans from the enemies they fought. Contact front, called Corporal Matt Johnson as Council security forces opened fire from behind improvised barricades. The aliens carried energy weapons that could punch holes through steel, but they had never faced opponents who treated urban warfare as an art form. The human soldiers moved like ghosts through the station's corridors, using tactics developed in the cities and jungles of Earth. They flanked defensive positions, used explosives to create new routes of attack, and coordinated their assault with a precision that left their enemies stunned and confused. When the last council stronghold fell, Torres found herself standing in the station's command center, surrounded by computers containing the records of 1,000 worlds. What she discovered there would fuel human rage for years to come. Admiral Parker, you need to see this, Torres reported over the secure channel. We've accessed their main database. The scale of what they have done, it's worse than we imagined. Dr. Alice Foster arrived on the captured station within hours, bringing with her a team of specialists in alien technology and linguistics. As they delved into the Council's records, a picture emerged of systematic oppression that spanned millennia. The Viridian homeworld had been strip-mined until it was little more than a barren rock floating in space. The artistic Luminari had been forbidden to create anything the Council deemed potentially subversive, their entire culture slowly strangled over centuries. Dozens of species had been driven to extinction simply because they had asked for basic rights. Broadcast this to every world in the galaxy, Foster told her communications team. Let every being know what the Council really is. Let them see the truth behind the lies about galactic peace. The revelation sparked uprisings across Council space. On world after world, oppressed populations rose against their masters, inspired by humanity's example and armed with the truth about their oppressors. The Council's carefully maintained order began to crumble as species that had been silent for centuries found their voices. The aquatic Delphinians of Tau City provided advanced sensor technology to the human fleet. The insectoid hive queens of the Trappist system offered their vast industrial capacity. Most shocking of all, the ancient archivists of Vega broke their millennia of neutrality and shared their complete database of Council crimes. Admiral Parker stood on the bridge of the UES Democracy, her new flagship, and watched as allied vessels from a dozen species joined her fleet. What had begun as humanity's fight for survival had become something larger, a war of liberation that would reshape the galaxy. "Signal from Earth Command," reported her communications officer. "President Carter wants to speak with you." Carter's face appeared on the main screen, her expression serious but determined. "Admiral, the Council is massing their remaining fleets for a final assault on Nexus Prime. Intelligence suggests they're planning to use weapons banned by their own laws." "They're getting desperate," Parker nodded grimly. "Then we better finish this before they do something that destroys half the galaxy. All ships prepare for hyperspace jump. It's time to take the fight to their front door." The Liberation Fleet departed for the Council's capital system, carrying with them the hopes of every enslaved world and the fury of a species that had learned to fight on a planet where only the strong survived. The Council had awakened something they could not control, and now they would face the consequences of 3,000 years of tyranny. The rebellion spread like wildfire across the galaxy as news of human victories reached every oppressed world. On planets where species had suffered under Council rule for generations, the impossible had become reality. The mighty Galactic Council was losing a war to newcomers from a single star system. General Paul Richards stood in the command center of Unity Base, the human military headquarters established on the liberated world of New Corinth. Banks of screens showed the positions of Allied fleets throughout Council space, each one representing a species that had thrown off the chains of oppression. "Latest intelligence reports." "Sir," said Colonel Amy Foster, his chief of staff, "the Delphinians have secured the entire Tau Ceti sector. The Hive Queens control production facilities in 17 systems, and the archivists are sharing Council military codes with every resistance cell in the galaxy." Richard studied the tactical displays with satisfaction. 3 months ago, humanity had stood alone against the Council's might. Now they commanded an alliance of dozens of species, each bringing their own unique capabilities to the fight. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. The aquatic Delphinians possessed sensor technology that could track Council ships across vast distances of space. Their living computers, grown rather than built, processed information in ways that made human quantum systems look primitive. Captain Steve Hunter had seen their capabilities firsthand when he visited the Delphinian homeworld of Aquatica Prime. The planet was mostly ocean, with floating cities that moved beneath the waves like massive jellyfish. The Delphinians themselves resembled Earth's dolphins, but with technological sophistication that humanity was only beginning to understand. "Your species learned to make war," in the Delphinian commander Resonance of Deep Currents had told Hunter through a translation device. "Our species learned to see everything. Together, we can end the Council's ability to hide their crimes." The insectoid hive queens of the Trappist system brought industrial capacity that dwarfed anything in human space. Their worlds were vast factory complexes where millions of workers labored in perfect coordination, producing ships and weapons faster than the Council could destroy them. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had accompanied the diplomatic mission to Trappist 1E, walking through manufacturing facilities that stretched from horizon to horizon. The hive queens themselves were massive creatures, each one controlling thousands of workers through biological communication networks. "For 800 years, we built ships for the Council," Queen 7th of the Eastern Spawning had explained. "Every vessel designed to carry our children into slavery. Now we build instruments of liberation, and every ship carries the fury of generations." But perhaps the most significant alliance came from the archivists of Vega, ancient beings who had remained neutral in galactic affairs for over 2,000 years. Their vast libraries contained the complete history of Council expansion, including detailed records of every atrocity committed in the name of galactic peace. Dr. Robert Taylor led the research team working with archivist databases on their crystal world of remembrance. The beings themselves were difficult to describe, appearing as shifting patterns of light and energy that communicated through complex mathematical equations. The Council believes they have hidden their crimes. The archivist entity designated as Keeper of Dark Truths had transmitted. "But we have recorded everything. Every genocide, every enslavement, every world destroyed for daring to resist. The truth will be their destruction." The revelations contained in archivist files shocked even hardened human soldiers. The peaceful Viridians had been strip-mined to extinction, not for their resources, but as an example to other worlds that might resist Council authority. The artistic Lumnari had been forbidden to create anything beautiful because beauty inspired hope, and hope led to rebellion. Captain Jerry Brooks commanded the UES Liberty as it arrived at the devastated Viridian homeworld. What his crew found there defied description. An entire planet had been hollowed out, its crust cracked open like an egg to reveal the industrial machinery that had consumed everything beneath. "Sir, we're detecting life signs in the deep caverns," reported his science officer. "Viridians, maybe a few hundred of them. They've been hiding underground for over 50 years. The rescue operation took 3 days, as human engineers worked to reach survivors trapped miles beneath the planet's surface. When they finally emerged, the Viridians were barely recognizable as the proud species they had once been. Generations of hiding in darkness had changed them, but their desire for revenge burned as bright as ever." Elder Catharian was one of the last Viridians who remembered their world before the Council came. His people had been master engineers, capable of building cities that floated in their planet's atmospheric layers. Now he stood on the bridge of a human warship, watching Council positions being marked for destruction. "They told the galaxy we had died from natural disasters," Catharian said, his translated voice thick with emotion. "But we survived to tell the truth. When the Council falls, the galaxy will know what they really are." Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds as the Liberation fleet grew in size and capability. The artistic Luminari emerged from underground galleries where they had preserved their culture in defiance of Council law. The nomadic Wanderer fleets scattered across the galaxy for centuries began converging on human positions to offer their support. Admiral Angela Brooks commanded the combined fleet from her flagship UES Justice, watching as ships from dozens of species formed the largest military force the galaxy had ever seen. The diversity was remarkable. Sleek Delphinian vessels that moved like living creatures, massive Hive Queen carriers that resembled flying cities, and ancient archivist ships that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. Fleet status report, Brooks requested from her tactical officer. 2,400 ships now under unified command, Lieutenant Commander Dave Wilson replied. 37 different species represented. The Council's remaining forces are outnumbered 3-1, but numbers alone would not win this war. The Council still controlled the most heavily defended systems in the galaxy, including their capital at Nexus Prime. More importantly, intercepted communications suggested they were preparing to use weapons that violated every treaty they had ever signed. Admiral Lisa Parker arrived at the fleet rendezvous point aboard the UES Democracy, bringing with her intelligence that chilled the blood of every human commander. Her ship had captured a Council courier vessel, carrying classified orders from the Inner Council. They're planning to deploy antimatter weapons against populated worlds, Parker announced to the assembled fleet commanders. If they can't maintain control, they're willing to commit genocide on a scale that makes their previous crimes look insignificant. The news sent shockwaves through the Allied fleet. Antimatter weapons could destroy entire star systems, turning suns into supernovas that would sterilize everything within dozens of light years. The Council was preparing to murder billions rather than face the consequences of their actions. General Richards joined the conference from his headquarters, his face grim with determination. Intelligence suggests they're massing their remaining fleets at Nexus Prime for a final stand. If we're going to stop them from using those weapons, we need to hit them before they can deploy. The decision was unanimous. Every species in the Alliance had lost too much to the Council's tyranny to allow them one final act of genocide. The Liberation Fleet began its final approach to the Council's capital system, carrying with them the hopes of every enslaved world and the fury of generations. Captain Nick Barnes, now commanding a squadron of stealth destroyers, received his final briefing as the fleet prepared for hyperspace jump. Primary objective is the Council's command complex on Nexus Prime. Secondary objectives are their antimatter storage facilities. We cannot allow them to detonate those weapons. As the largest fleet in galactic history prepared to jump to the Council's doorstep, a message was broadcast to every world in the galaxy. President Helen Carter spoke for all of humanity and their allies, her words carrying across the void to reach beings who had never dared to hope for freedom. To every enslaved world, every oppressed people, every being who has suffered under Council rule, your liberation is at hand. The age of tyranny ends today. The galaxy belongs to all of us, not to those who would rule through fear and violence. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying 2,000 ships and the combined fury of dozens of species toward the final confrontation. The Council had awakened something they could not control when they threatened humanity's home. And now they would face the consequences of 3,000 years of galactic oppression. In the depths of space, engines burned with the light of stars as the Liberation fleet raced toward its destiny. The heavens themselves seemed to hold their breath as the galaxy prepared for the battle that would decide the fate of countless worlds. The final battle began above Nexus Prime as 2,000 Allied ships emerged from hyperspace to face the last remnants of Council power. The ancient capital world hung before them like a jewel of crystal and metal, its orbital platforms bristling with weapons that had defended the seat of galactic government for 3 millennia. Admiral Lisa Parker stood on the bridge of the UES Liberation, watching as the Council's remaining fleet moved to intercept them. Nearly 1,000 ships represented the core species of the galactic government: sleek hegemony cruisers, massive Epsilon Dominion dreadnoughts, and the mysterious vessels of the inner circle that few beings had ever seen. Enemy fleet is assuming defensive formation around the planet, reported Captain Helen Torres from her position at the tactical station. They're using the orbital stations as cover. Admiral, those platforms have enough firepower to destroy small moons. Parker studied the display with the cold calculation of a warrior who had spent her life preparing for this moment. The Council had chosen their battlefield well, but they had made one crucial mistake. They still thought this was a conventional war between military forces. Signal all ships, Parker ordered. Execute Operation Fallen Angel. Show them what humans learned fighting each other for 10,000 years. The Liberation fleet scattered in dozens of directions, breaking the classical formation that had governed space warfare for centuries. Instead of massing their firepower against the Council's strongest positions, the Allied ships began a complex dance of attack and retreat that confused alien tactical computers. Captain Nick Barnes led his stealth squadron through the outer system, using the gravity of Nexus Prime's moons to mask their approach. His ships were invisible to Council sensors, their hulls coated with materials that absorbed rather than reflected energy. Target the antimatter storage facility on the third moon, Barnes told his weapons officer. If those weapons detonate in the middle of their fleet, they'll take out half the system. The first phase of the battle was over before the Council commanders realized it had begun. Human torpedoes struck the antimatter facility with surgical precision, the explosions contained by force fields that prevented a chain reaction. In seconds, the Council's ultimate weapon was reduced to harmless vapor. Fleet Admiral Keth Valor of the Inner Circle watched his carefully planned defenses crumble from the bridge of his flagship. For 40 years, he had commanded Council fleets and campaigns across the galaxy. He had destroyed rebellious worlds and enslaved entire species. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for enemies who refused to fight by the rules. How are they doing this? He demanded as human fighters swarmed through his formation like angry insects. Their ships are smaller and less advanced. We should be destroying them easily. His tactical officer, a crystalline being from the hegemony, flickered with confusion. Admiral, they are not following standard engagement protocols. Their attack patterns make no tactical sense according to our simulations. The truth was that human military doctrine had been forged in the crucible of Earth's deadliest conflicts. Every strategy had been tested against opponents just as intelligent and ruthless as themselves. The Council had spent millennia fighting species that had never known real war. Admiral Angela Brooks commanded the second wave of the assault from her flagship UES Democracy. Her target was the orbital command complex where the Council's leadership had retreated to coordinate their final stand. The station was protected by shields that could withstand Nova-level energy bursts, but humans had learned long ago that every defense had a weakness. Launch the boarding pods, Brooks ordered. Time to show these aliens what Marines can do when they're properly motivated. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Martinez led the assault teams as they crashed through the station's outer hull like meteors. His soldiers had trained for this moment in the zero-gravity combat simulators aboard human ships, practicing urban warfare in 3 dimensions. The Council's security forces met them in the station's corridors, with energy weapons and powered armor that made them nearly invulnerable to conventional attacks. But the humans carried weapons designed to kill other humans, the most dangerous predators their homeworld had ever produced. Contact Front called Sergeant Rachel Torres as alien defenders opened fire from a fortified checkpoint. Looks like hegemony shock troops. They've got the corridor locked down tight. Martinez studied the tactical situation with the eye of a soldier who had fought in Earth's most brutal conflicts. The aliens had established a perfect killing field, with overlapping fields of fire and no obvious routes of attack. It was exactly the kind of problem human military engineers had been solving for centuries. "Torres, take your squad through the ventilation system," Martinez ordered. "Johnson, use shape charges to breach the wall on the left flank." Peterson lay down suppressing fire. "Let's show these bugs how we do things back home." The assault unfolded with the precision of a symphony conducted by masters of violence. Human soldiers moved through the station like ghosts, using tactics that the Council had never encountered. They breached walls, crawled through service tunnels, and coordinated their attack with a skill that left their enemies stunned and confused. When the last Council stronghold fell, Martinez found himself standing in the command center where the Inner Circle had directed the oppression of the galaxy for 3,000 years. The alien leaders cowered behind their crystalline control panels, their inhuman faces twisted with fear. Prime Zethkalar himself sat slumped in his command throne, his once bright crystalline form now dim with defeat. Around him, the displays showed the systematic destruction of everything he had built over centuries of careful planning. "You have destroyed galactic civilization," Zethkalar said, his translated voice heavy with bitterness. "Without the Council's guidance, the galaxy will descend into chaos and war." Martinez looked at the alien leader with the contempt of a soldier who had seen too much death caused by those who claimed to know better. "Mister, where I come from, we call what you built slavery, and we've got a real problem with slavery." The final phase of the battle played out in the space around Nexus Prime as the remaining Council ships attempted a desperate breakout. Their commanders had finally realized that this was not a conventional military engagement. They were facing an enemy that had learned to fight by destroying itself over and over again, evolving new ways to kill with each generation. Admiral Parker coordinated the pursuit from her flagship, watching as Council vessels fled toward the outer system in complete disorder. The disciplined formations that had conquered dozens of worlds dissolved into panic as human weapons found their targets with lethal precision. "Signal from the Council, flagship," reported her communications officer. "They're requesting terms for surrender." Parker considered the request for exactly 3 seconds. "Tell them to surrender unconditionally or be destroyed. Those are the only terms we offer to slavers and murderers." The Council's last fleet commander, Admiral Thexmar of the Epsilon Dominion, made the choice that would echo through galactic history. Rather than face the justice that awaited war criminals, he ordered his remaining ships to fight to the death. The final engagement lasted 18 minutes. When it was over, the space around Nexus Prime was filled with the debris of 1,000 Council ships, their hulls torn open by weapons that should not have existed. The galactic government that had ruled for 3 millennia was reduced to scrap metal drifting in the void. Admiral Parker stood in the captured Council chambers and looked out at the fleet that had accomplished the impossible. Ships from dozens of species hung in formation around the capital world, their crews representing every corner of the galaxy. What had begun as humanity's fight for survival had become something much larger. President Helen Carter's image appeared on screens throughout the chamber as she addressed the liberated galaxy from her office in Washington. "To all free beings, the age of Council tyranny is over. From the ashes of their empire, we will build something better. A true alliance of equals where no species rules over another." She gestured toward the viewport where human ships patrolled alongside vessels from freed worlds. "And to any who would threaten the innocent in the future, remember this day. Remember that somewhere in this galaxy lives a species that climbed from a world of war and death, and chose to use their strength to protect the weak." Prime Zethkalar was brought before the Liberation Fleet's commanders in chains that could hold beings far stronger than any human. His crystalline form was cracked and dim, the light that had once marked his authority now flickering like a dying star. "You want our surrender," he said, his voice bitter with the taste of defeat. Admiral Parker shook her head. "No, we want justice. You will stand trial for your crimes. Every species you oppressed will have their say. And then we'll build a galaxy where beings like you can never rise to power again." In the months that followed, the trials of Council war criminals became the most watched proceedings in galactic history. Species that had been silent for centuries finally had their day in court, their testimony revealing the true scope of the Council's crimes. The Viridian survivors told of their world's destruction. The Lumnari artists displayed the culture they had